Welcome back to Inside Vietnam. I'm glad you're here. Every story we tell on this channel has a shape you can recognize. Man arrives, man meets woman. Things go wrong. Man loses money. Man goes home, or doesn't. And most of the time, if you squint at it, you can see the villain pretty clearly. Maybe she was running a script from the start. Maybe she had a husband you didn't know about. Maybe the whole thing was engineered from the first cup of coffee. This story isn't like that. And I want to warn you about that up front, because I think it might be harder to watch than the ones that are. His name is Paddy Noonan. He's 59 years old, he's from Limerick in Ireland, and he spent 32 years as a self-employed plumber before ending up in Da Nang with a monthly pension, a second-hand motorbike, and a gecko he named Derek. He's not a naive man. He's not a fool. He's the kind of man who can walk into a building, listen to the walls for 30 seconds, and tell you exactly where the water is going wrong and why. He just couldn't do that for himself. What happened to Paddy in Vietnam isn't a clean cautionary tale. It's messier than that, and quieter. And it asks a question that I think most men in his situation never think to ask until it's far too late. That question is this: when everyone around you can see exactly what's happening, and you're the only one who can't, what does that cost you? This one's going to stay with you. Here's his story, in his own words. Right. So, I'm a plumber. Was a plumber. Was a plumber. Am a plumber technically, in that I still fix pipes when someone asks me to, and I still think in terms of what's underneath things. 32 years of it in Limerick, self-employed, which sounds grand until you factor in that self-employed in Ireland, means no sick pay, no redundancy, no pension worth a damn, and every year filing your own taxes with a level of creative interpretation that would have given an accountant a stroke. I knew my trade. I was good at my trade. I can still walk into a bathroom and tell you in 40 seconds what the previous plumber did wrong and why it'll cost you twice as much to fix it now. That's not nothing, but it doesn't exactly set you up for retirement. And it doesn't, as it turns out, make you any better at spotting the things in your own life that are quietly backing up behind the walls. I grew up on the south side of Limerick, the working side, which in fairness is most of it. My father worked at Krupp's before it closed. My mother cleaned offices at the University of Limerick until her knees gave out, and the lesson I learned watching both of them was that you showed up, you did the work, you kept your complaints to yourself, and you got on with it. Limerick people have a reputation for directness that I think is really just efficiency. We don't have the patience for the long way around a thing. Say it, deal with it, move on. I've lived my whole life that way. Mostly it served me fine. I was married for 19 years to a woman named Deirdre. I won't go into it in great detail because she's a decent person and she doesn't deserve to be a chapter in someone's YouTube story. It's enough to say that by the end, we'd been living separate lives inside the same house for about 4 years before we made it official, and when we finally did, neither of us cried, which told you everything you needed to know about where we got to. Split the house, split the proceeds, split the furniture, split the children in the particular way that divorce splits children, not cleanly, but along invisible fault lines that don't show up for years. 3 kids. AOE fees in Dublin, works in finance, has her mother's eyes and her mother's efficiency. Kyran's in Dublin too, teaches secondary school, rings me at Christmas and on my birthday, and not much in between, which is fine, that's just how he is. And then Neef. The youngest, 26, when the marriage ended, and the one who'd always, I don't know how to say this exactly. She was the one who still rang to see how I was doing. After a hard job, after a bad week. She was the one who'd send me a stupid video on WhatsApp because she knew it'd make me laugh. She was also the one who rang me about 18 months after the divorce and said, in a voice that was very careful and very kind and utterly rehearsed, that she needed some space from me for a while. She didn't say why, not in so many words. She said something about needing to process things, about the divorce having been hard on all of them, about how she hoped I understood. And I said, of course I understood. Of course, take all the time you need. And then I sat in the kitchen of the flat I was renting in Dooradoyle, and I ate the rest of my beans on toast, and I watched the news, and I went to bed. It wasn't a row. I think about that a lot, actually. It wasn't a row, which would have been easier. You can recover from a row. A row has an end point. a resolution, somewhere you can get back to. This had no edges to grab onto. Dot tot. Dot tot. She just closed the door, quietly. And the click of it stayed with me in a way that a slam never would have. After that, I moved around a bit. Nothing dramatic. Just a kind of restless practicality, a slightly cheaper flat, a different part of Limerick, 6 months in Ennis, that didn't really work out. I picked up jobs here and there because the work was always there if you wanted it. And I always wanted it, because a job is a thing that fills a day in a way that requires no explanation. You fix the pipe, you get paid, you go home. No one asks you how you're feeling. I don't think I was depressed. I don't think I was depressed. I know what depression looks like. I've seen it in lads I grew up with, the real darkness of it. It was more like a frequency that had gone out. Background noise. The kind of quiet that you stop noticing after a while because it's just the weather. The Vietnam thing started as a WhatsApp photo. Tommy Whelan, who'd I known since we were apprentices together, had moved to Da Nang about 3 years prior, remarried, settled right in, and had taken to sending me photographs of himself eating things on beaches with an expression that I can only describe as aggressively contented. I gave him a hard time about it, because that's what you do. But at 2 in the morning, one October night, with a cup of tea going cold beside me, I typed Vietnam, cost of living into YouTube, and sat there for 2 hours, watching men I'd never met tell me about apartment rents and street food prices and weather in January. The arithmetic was simple. My state pension was about €900 a month once tax was done with it. In Limerick, that's survivable, barely. In Da Nang, according to a man from Doncaster on YouTube, who seemed very pleased with himself, it was enough to live on with a bit left over. I texted Tommy at 2:30 in the morning. He replied immediately, which should have told me he wasn't sleeping well either. But I didn't think about that at the time. I just asked him, "Is it as cheap as they say?" He said, "Cheaper." I booked the flights 4 days later, not because I was brave or adventurous or running toward anything in particular. Just because somewhere cheaper, somewhere warmer, somewhere that nobody had an opinion about how I'd turned out, that felt, at 59 years of age, like the only sum that was adding up. The flight from Dublin to Da Nang goes through Doha, which means you spend 4 hours in an airport that looks like someone built a shopping center inside a fever dream. I bought a bottle of water for €6, ate a sandwich I couldn't identify, and sat watching men in suits stride purposefully in all directions. I had one bag, a carry-on, and 17 Vietnamese words on a laminated card I'd printed off the internet. CEM Jin Cao. Bao en Hio Tien. How much does this cost? Useful. I landed in Da Nang at 11 at night in early March, and the heat came through the terminal doors like someone had left the immersion on. Not warm, hot, thick with it. I'd read about the humidity, but reading about it and walking into it are two entirely different things. I stood outside the arrivals hall with my bag and my laminated card, and the air sat on me like a wet coat, and I thought, right, this is happening. Tommy was waiting in the car park, which at that hour was a spectacular chaos of motorbikes and taxis, and men shouting things I didn't understand, and a family of 5 on a single Honda Wave, moving through it all like it was perfectly normal, because it was. Tommy looked exactly the same as he had the last time I'd seen him, at a retirement due in Ennis 3 years prior, except tan to the point of looking slightly unwell by Irish standards. He shook my hand and said, "Well, you're here." I said, "I am." He said, "You look terrible." I said, 14 hours in a plane will do that. And we were fine after that, the way you are with someone you've known since you were 19. His wife, Lan, not Balan, from the guest house, different Lan, I would learn there a lot of Lans, had organized me a room in a guest house 3 streets from theirs in Sintra. Tommy had been clear from the start. I was not staying with them, and he was not my minder, and his wife had not moved him to Da Nang so he could supervise another Irishman making a bags of things. I respected that. I still respect it. The guest house was run by a woman named Balan, different Lan, as I said, who was 60 years old, had the energy of a woman of 40, and charged me 40 million dong a month for a room on the 2nd floor. That's about €165. The room had a ceiling fan, walls the color of old teeth, a window that looked out over a narrow hum where someone cooked banzeo every morning at 7, and the smell of it, the sizzle and the fish sauce and the green onion, came up through the window, whether I wanted it to or not. And I always wanted it to, as it turned out. There was also, on the wall above the door, a gecko about the length of my hand who regarded me with complete indifference on the first night and every night thereafter. I called him Derek. I don't know why, the name suited him. He ate mosquitoes and minded his own business, and was, in those first few weeks, the most uncomplicated relationship I had. I want to say something about that room, because I know how it sounds. €60 a week, peeling paint, a gecko, a ceiling fan that wobbled slightly and made a faint clicking sound on every second rotation. And I was genuinely, properly happy in it. Not performing happiness, actually content in a way I hadn't been in years. Nobody in that building knew me. Nobody had an opinion about my marriage, or my children, or the state of my finances. Balan said good morning and good evening, and occasionally left a bag of fruit outside my door for reasons I never fully understood. And that was the entire extent of my social obligations. And I cannot tell you what a relief that was. I had my pension coming in, €900 a month, give or take, and within 2 weeks I'd picked up my first cash-in-hand job, an Australian expat in a rented villa near Mouse Key Beach, who'd managed to install a bathroom tap in a way that was genuinely impressive in its wrongness. Word went around the expat circles fast enough. Irish plumber, shows up when he says he will, sober, doesn't overcharge. I was doing 3 or 4 jobs a month within the first few weeks, not getting rich, covering my costs and then some. The pension was the floor and the plumbing was the margin, and for the first time in a while, the sums were working. I bought a laminated vocabulary card at a stall near the Han Market. 5 new words a week, that was the plan. I managed about 15 before the system broke down completely, but I kept the card in my shirt pocket every day, and I still have it. cm.n.jinchao, .jin, jinchao, genta, gen, gentang, gen, no thank you. Tommy suggested hi on a Saturday in late April. Every new arrival goes, he said. It's 45 minutes down the coast road, just go and have a look. His wife had family obligations that weekend and he'd a bit of rewiring to finish in someone's kitchen, so I went on the bus alone, which suited me. I didn't need minding. Hi on is, I'm going to sound like a brochure here, and I apologize, but there's no other way to say it. It's something else. The old town with its lanterns and its yellow walls and the river with the little wooden boats, tour groups and cyclos and French colonial shop fronts, and a smell off the streets of incense and river water. And something sweet I never identified. I walked around for 2 hours feeling simultaneously like a tourist and like I'd arrived somewhere. I went to a tailor shop on Trin Phu Street because Tommy had told me to get a couple of shirts made. You won't get a decent shirt for that price anywhere. Go in and get measured. The woman behind the counter was 24. I know that now. At the time, I just saw a young woman in a blue ao dai who looked up when I came in and said, "Hello, can I help you?" Her name was Lynn. She had a pen behind her ear and a measuring tape around her neck, and she spoke English with the particular careful clarity of someone who'd learned it properly, rather than just absorbing it. I explained I wanted 2 shirts. Tommy had told me the standard. A light linen for daytime and something slightly smarter for if I ever needed it. She asked me what colors, what collar, what sleeve length. Professional, efficient, no performance. Then she asked where I was from. I said, Ireland. She said, ah, like the football, I said, more or less. She said something about a player she'd seen on television, a game, I think she meant a World Cup qualifier, I couldn't tell you which one. And she said, how do you say thank you in Irish? And I said, go Rav Meith Agat, which is not easy. It's pronounced something like G, Rev Ma, Ah, Gut, and it's a phrase that has ended more than one tourist attempt at the language on the spot. She tried it. She genuinely tried it 3 times, each time slightly different, each time wrong in a different direction. And then she looked at me with an expression of complete mock offense and said, this is not a real language, and I laughed properly for the first time in, I can't tell you how long. I can't actually tell you. I bought the 2 shirts. I came back to collect them on Thursday. They were perfect. I paid the 400,000 dong, about €15 each, which is the kind of number that still makes my head swim, and said CM in. and she laughed again at my pronunciation, and I walked back to the bus stop. It was warm. There was incense burning from a little shrine in the wall of the building next door. A woman on a motorbike had a basket of dragon fruit on the back and was honking at a tourist who'd stopped dead in the middle of the lane to take a photograph. I hadn't smiled like that in a while. Proper smiled. Not the social kind you put on for a room. The other kind. I went back to Da Nang, made myself dinner, watched something on my phone, went to bed. Derek was on the wall. The fan clicked. I lay there for a while in the dark. I'd go back to Hien next weekend, I decided, just to see the town again. I'd barely covered half of it. I went back the following Saturday, just to see the town, like I said, and the one after that, and the one after that. I want to be straight with you about how this worked, because it'd be easy to make it sound like I was pursuing her, and that's not quite right. But it'd also be easy to make it sound like I was just an innocent man wandering around Huiyan for 6 consecutive weekends by coincidence. And that's not right either. The truth is somewhere in the middle, which is where the truth usually is, and also where it does the most damage. The third time I came into the shop, she wasn't there. Different woman behind the counter, older, who spoke no English and sold me a pair of linen trousers I didn't need with the quiet efficiency of someone who does this 40 times a day. I walked out, and I noticed I was disappointed in a specific, pointed way that I tried to categorize as something else. Mild, fleeting, grand. The fourth time she was there, she remembered my name. Patty, she said. You come back. She said, you come back. She sounded genuinely pleased rather than professionally pleased. And at 59 years of age, I'd developed enough experience of both to know the difference. I thought I had anyway. We got café on the 5th or 6th visit, her suggestion. She finished her shift at 6, and there was a place 2 streets over, she said, where the café was good. I said, is that the coffee with the condensed milk? She said yes. I said I'd heard it was very sweet. She said, you will be fine. You are Irish. You put sugar in everything. Which was accurate enough that I didn't argue. We sat on plastic stools outside a place on a side street off in Wan Tai Hook and drank cold coffee through straws, and she asked me things. This is what I want you to understand. She asked me things. Where exactly in Limerick? What was it like? Did I miss it? What kind of plumbing, commercial or residential? Did I have children? I gave her the children answer in the abbreviated version, which is 3, grown up, or not very close at the moment, and I changed the subject quickly enough that she could take the hint if she wanted to. She took the hint. She moved on. She asked about the plumbing instead, and I told her some story about a job in a hotel in Limerick city center years ago, a pipe that had been incorrectly installed behind a wall for 12 years before it finally announced itself through someone's ceiling, and she laughed at the right moment, which was genuinely the right moment, not a polite moment. I'm aware of how this sounds. Middle-aged man, young woman, she laughs at his stories. I know what that looks like from the outside. But there was something. I want to try to describe this accurately. There was something genuinely attentive about her that wasn't performance. She wasn't flattering me. She was interested. Or she was very, very good at interested. And at the time I couldn't tell the difference, and I'm not sure I can now, fully. She told me about herself in those early conversations, and she told me plainly, without drama. 24 years old. From a village about 30 kilometers outside Tam Kai, which is south of Da Nang, further down the coast. Her parents farmed a small plot of land, modest living, hard work. She'd come to Shia, and 3 years earlier with 2 cousins, her mother's sister's daughters, and they rented a room together in a flat near Shia An Shi Bridge, the 3 of them, which kept the costs manageable. She sent money home every month. 3 to 4 million dong, roughly 110 to 150 euro, which she said without any particular drama, as if it were just a fact about her life, which it was. She worked long shifts at the tailor shop. 6 days a week in high season, which in Heian runs basically from October through April, and then you do your best through the quiet months. She was tired in the evenings. Not performing tired, actually tired, the way you are when you've been on your feet for 9 hours dealing with tourists. She had ambitions. She wanted to improve her English, wanted eventually to work in a hotel, maybe one day save enough to help her parents fix the roof of their house. These weren't grand speeches. They came out in pieces, across several conversations, the way real plans do. I mention all of this because it matters. She wasn't performing struggle for my benefit. The struggle was there, whether I was there or not. I think about that. I still think about that. Because it's one of the things that made the rest of it so hard to parse. Through May and into June, we met most Saturdays. She came to Da Nang twice on her day off. There was a specific place she liked on the beach at Mihe, she said, near a spot where they sold Boon Bio Huesh from a cart, and she'd been meaning to go back, so we went. The second time she got a grab bike from the bus stop, and I met her there, and we ate noodles in the shade, and I paid for hers. Because of course I did, that's just what you do. And for a few weeks it was just that, meals. The occasional phone top-up when hers ran low. Small amounts, 15 or 20 euros in total across the whole period. Not nothing, not something. Background noise. Then I bought the motorbike. I want to be honest about the motorbike because it's where the story actually starts, even though it didn't look like a start at the time. There was a man in the expat group on Facebook selling a 2015 Honda Wave, blue, a bit of rust on the left footrest, 18 million dong. I did the maths, 18 million dong is about 660 euro. For a motorbike. In Limerick, that's a laugh. In Da Nang, it was a mode of transport and a degree of freedom that made sense for the life I was building there. I told Tommy it was for the convenience. Getting to jobs without relying on Grab, independence, practical. All true. Also true, I'd started collecting Lynn from the tailor shop on Saturday evenings because she finished after the last buses ran, and a Grab back to where her cousins lived was 120,000 dong she didn't need to spend. That's 60 or 70 cents. I know. I know how small that number is. But a pattern doesn't need to start with large numbers. It just needs to start. Tommy and I had a drink one evening at a place near Santra, a quiet bar where a few of the expat crowd went on Thursdays. And at some point he said, in the mild, careful tone of a man who has chosen his words before leaving the house, something along the lines of, just so you know, the dynamic between foreign men and younger Vietnamese women can get complicated in ways that aren't always obvious from the inside. He said it as general wisdom, not about me specifically, not about me specifically, not about Lynn specifically, just for information. I said, yeah, I know, I've watched the YouTube videos, I'm not an EG. And then I made a joke about the motorbike and how the rust on the footrest gave it character, and he laughed, and the conversation moved on. He didn't laugh the way he usually laughs, though. Tommy has a big laugh normally, full chest. This was a shorter version. I noticed it at the time, and I chose, with complete awareness, to stop noticing it. It was around this time that she introduced me to her cousins. Both of them were there one Sunday evening when I drove down to Hyun Lone, who was 22 and worked at a restaurant near the waterfront, and Hyung, who was 31, worked in a small fabric wholesaler and spoke English well enough to have a real conversation. Lone was loud and funny and immediately started making fun of my Vietnamese pronunciation, which I appreciated. Hyung was quieter, watchful, I'd have said. Polite in a way that was, I'd have said. Polite in a way that was, I don't know, considered. Like she was deciding things. I shook hands, used my laminated card words, got laughed at warmly. Someone brought out a plate of ban hee trong, the grilled rice paper they do in Hee An, with egg and spring onion, and we sat around a small table in the flat's main room with a family altar in the corner and incense burning in front of a photograph of an older man. And there was karaoke leaking through the wall from the flat next door. And I ate the food and tried to follow the conversation, and at some point I thought, this is a life, someone's actual life. And I'm in it. That feeling. I hadn't felt that in. Honestly. I'm not sure I can remember. Being part of something. Not just adjacent to it. I drove back to Da Nang that night on the Honda Wave, the coast road, the sea to my right, and the lights of the city coming up ahead, and I thought about precisely nothing for 45 minutes, which is the best I'd felt in years. That was the most dangerous I'd ever been. I understand that now. Not because of anything that was going to happen to me. Because of what I was willing to do to stay inside that feeling. Sometime in July, she started calling me Anch. I looked it up before she ever used it. I'd been looking things up since the early weeks. Vietnamese terms that came up in conversation, phrases I didn't catch, cultural notes that seemed relevant. So I knew what aunt meant. It's a pronoun, technically, what you call an older man you're close to. Brother, in the literal translation. But that's not quite how it functions. It's intimacy. It's acknowledgement of a particular kind of relationship. When she said it the first time, casually, mid-sentence, I didn't say anything. Neither did she. It was already there, and that was that. I was making the trip to Huiyan twice a week by August. Saturday as usual, and then Wednesdays when her shift ended early. I told myself this was practical, I had flexible time, the drive was nothing, 45 minutes on the coast road with the sea on my right, and the air warm even in the evening. Which was all true. I just left out the part where one was counting the days between. She started staying over in Da Nang occasionally, not every week, once or twice a month, when she had 2 consecutive days off, which was rare enough in high season that it felt like a gift each time. Balan said nothing about it. She charged me nothing extra. But the first morning Lynn came downstairs for breakfast, Balan looked at me over the rim of her tea glass with an expression I can only describe as the look my mother used to give the dog when it had been in the bins. Not angry, not judgmental exactly, just a very complete and very ancient form of knowing. I said "Xin Zen" for the tea, and she said something in Vietnamese that I didn't understand and went back to her kitchen. I think about that look now. I think about it quite a bit. The money started moving in this period in a way that felt, and I want to be precise about this, it felt like the natural behavior of a person in a relationship, not like anything else. Her phone bill came due in August, and she mentioned it the way you mention something that's slightly awkward, not looking at me directly, saying her wages had been short that week because of a late payment from the shop. 600,000 dong. 22 euro. I said, don't worry about it, here. And I transferred it on Zalo Pay before the conversation had time to become uncomfortable. She thanked me in that way she had, genuinely, not effusively, not with great performance, just a hand on my arm and a look that said she meant it. And then again, the following month. Same amount, same circumstances, different reason. I didn't ask questions, I paid it. The tourist season wound down in September, and the tailor shop reduced her hours, which is apparently standard. Shuai'an quiets considerably after the summer crowds thin out and the shops adjust. She mentioned this to me one evening over bun shu at a place her cousin Lone had recommended, a small spot in a hum near the central market. Plastic stools, a woman cooking over charcoal out front, the smoke drifting into the narrow lane. Lynn said her share of the flat rent was going to be difficult for the next few months. 3 months at 1,050,000 dong per month, that's about 4.5 million total, 165 euro. 165 euro. I said I'd cover it. She said she couldn't accept that. I said go on, it's grand. She said she would pay me back when the season picked up. She didn't pay me back. I didn't expect her to. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't keeping a ledger. I wasn't thinking of it as a debt. I was thinking of it as what you do for someone you care about who needs a hand. Lone had the motorbike accident in late September. Came off the bike on a wet road near the Ansi Bridge, bruised rib, nothing broken. But the hospital visit cost 3 million dong, about 110 euro, and between the 3 of them they didn't have it. I gave Lynn the money the following Saturday. I remember it was raining, the first real rain I'd seen since arriving, and we were sitting inside at a cafe on Tromfu, the kind of place with wooden furniture and old photographs on the walls, and she was telling me about Lone's accident. And I could see she was embarrassed to bring up the money, and I just said, tell me the amount. And she did, and I said fine. And she looked at me with something I genuinely could not have categorized as anything other than gratitude. It wasn't relief. It wasn't relief. It was something warmer than that. The water pump was October. Her parents' house in Tam Coin had no functioning pump. They'd been managing without one for several months, carrying water from a neighbor. 6 million dong, about 220 euro, for a new pump and installation. Lynn told me this in the same way she told me everything, plainly, without drama, as information rather than appeal. I said I'd send it. She said she was going to try to sort it herself. I said, Lynn, send me the account number. She did. And then the school fees for her younger brother. November. He was 17, needed fees for his second semester of secondary school. 3.5 million dong, about 130 euro. The way she asked me this one was different. She sat very still and looked at her hands and said, I am sorry to ask again. And that stillness, that apology, I didn't want her to feel like that. So I said, stop apologizing, just send me the details. She squeezed my hand when I said that. She squeezed my hand when I said that. She said something in Vietnamese, quietly, and I didn't ask her to translate it. I think about that now, too. The choosing to let the feeling stand, without needing to know its exact shape. We were at roughly €900 total by this point, across the whole stretch of things, counting the motorbike separately. I know this because I've done the maths since. At the time, I wasn't doing any maths at all, which was the point, really. Tommy had a second go at me in October, more directly this time. We were eating at a Quan Nan, who near the waterfront in Da Nang. The kind of place with long tables and tiger beer and buckets of ice and grilled meat arriving on metal skewers. And at some point he said, still in that careful, measured tone he'd adopted for these conversations, "Look, I'm not telling you what to do, but there's a pattern with the money requests that I've seen before, and I think you should be aware of it." I said, "Tommy, I appreciate it, but I know what I'm doing." He said, "Do you?" I said, "She's not running a game on me. She's just in a difficult situation. Her family's poor, the requests are real, I can see that." He nodded, he drank his beer, he let it go. What he didn't say, and what I noticed him not saying, was, "You're right, fair enough." He just absorbed it and moved on. And I told myself that was agreement, and it wasn't. It was also around October that I started to notice things in public. A texture, I described it to myself at the time. Not hostility, not overt anything, just a quality of attention. A man at a market stall near Sun Market, speaking to Lynn, laughing about something, then looking at me with an expression that lasted about 2 seconds and contained about 40 years of experience. A group of women at a banh mi cart near the guest house who went quiet when we walked past, then started talking again once we'd gone. A waiter at a Ken Mi M place in Santre who looked at us being seated and then looked away in a specific way. I'm a man who reads buildings. I know the difference between nothing. I know the difference between nothing. I filed it under. Cultural difference. Foreign couple, unusual pairing, people notice things. Reasonable explanation. I adjusted my self-explanation as required and kept going. It was around this time that I started noticing Hing more carefully. She'd been part of the evenings at the flat for months, but she'd always been quieter than Lone, sitting with her tea, listening, contributing occasionally when her English was sufficient to the conversation. I'd read it as shyness, as reserve. She was 31 and worked hard, and perhaps she was just tired in the evenings, I thought. But there was something else in how she looked at me. Not unfriendly. Not, I don't know. Like someone waiting for a moment that hadn't come yet. I didn't know how to read it, so I didn't read it. By the end of month 7, my monthly surplus, the gap between what came in and what went out, was gone. I was meeting my own costs, barely, and the plumbing jobs covered the margin that was supposed to be cushion. I told myself each thing was a one-off: the phone bill, the rent, the hospital, the pump, the hospital, the pump, the school fees. One-off, one-off. 32 years of plumbing. I've stood in front of more than one homeowner and told them, the reason this keeps happening isn't bad luck. It's the system. The system isn't right. And they look at me and say, but it was fine for years. And I say, until it wasn't. I knew that speech by heart. I just wasn't applying it to the right situation. Her father's name was Ing Min. I know this because Lynn mentioned him often, and because by November I was paying for his medical care. And it seemed important to know the name of the man whose health was eating through what remained of my financial margin. It started the way everything started with Lynn. Plainly, no drama. She mentioned one evening in early October that her father hadn't been well, that her mother was worried, that he'd seen a local doctor in Tam Kai, but the doctor had said he needed further tests. The visit to the GP had cost 4 million dong, about €147. Her parents didn't have it. She was going to send her wages that month directly to cover it instead of her regular amount. She was telling me this as information, not as a request. She was looking at the table. I said I'd cover it. She said no. No, Doc Hunter. I said, Lynn, come on. She said she didn't want me to feel, and she stopped, searched for the English word, said, obligated. I said I didn't feel obligated. I felt like helping. She let me. Now. I want to be fair about this. Her father was sick. The money went to a GP in Tam Kio. These were real facts about a real situation in a real family's life. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was robbed, because I don't think that's the right word for any of it. What I am going to tell you is that once you've paid for something like that, once you've been the person who made the problem go away, something shifts. The shape of the relationship shifts. Not dramatically, just a degree or two. Enough that the next time something comes up, the question of whether to help isn't really a question anymore. The specialist referral came 3 weeks later. The GP in Tam Kon had flagged something and wanted Ong Min seen at a larger hospital in Da Nang, a proper private clinic on Ong Yen V in Lynn, the kind expats used. 8 million dong for the consultation and initial tests. That's about €294. I didn't hesitate. And then the medication. 2.5 million dong per month, €92, recurring. Blood pressure? Some kind of cardiac issue. The details coming to me through Lynn's careful English and her occasional pauses when she couldn't find the medical term. I said I'd cover it. She said for how long? I said we'd see how it goes. She said she was going to find a way to manage it herself when the tourist season picked up. I said, of course. The tourist season was not going to save us. I knew this on some level. The maths were not complicated. My pension was €900 a month. My rent was €165. Food and transport took another 200 or so. The plumbing jobs were bringing in 300 or 400 on a good month. That left, in theory, a few €100 of margin. The medication alone was taking 92 of it. The GP and specialist visits had already gone. I was running short, so I started borrowing from Tommy. Not large amounts. €500 the first time, mid-October, and I told him it was for a visa renewal fee and a flight to Cambodia for a visa run. Irish passports get 90 days visa-free in Vietnam, but 90 days comes around faster than you'd think, and the visa run, a quick trip to Da Nang's border or down to Cambodia by bus, is standard practice for long-stay expats. Expensive enough to be plausible. Tommy handed it over without comment and without a look that said anything in particular, which is the mark of a man who has decided to be a good friend even when he thinks you're making a mistake. I did the visa run, which was real, and cost about €150 including the bus and 2 nights in Phnom Penh. The rest I used for Lynn's father's medication and the remainder of her rent shortfall. I want to try to explain the logic I was operating on at the time because I've spent a fair amount of time since trying to understand it. I'd spent 32 years fixing things for people. That was the job. Someone has a problem, you go in, you assess it, you fix it. You don't ask whether the pipe deserves to be fixed. You don't means test the leak. The thing is broken, the person needs it sorted, you sort it. That was the entire professional framework of my adult life. And I was applying it, I think, in a context where it didn't apply. Her father was sick, the money was needed. I had more than she had. Therefore, I help. The logic was clean and completely inadequate to the actual situation, and I couldn't see that at the time. There's something else I should say about this period, and I want to say it carefully. I wasn't thinking about Lynn as a permanent future. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't planning to marry her or retire to a bungalow in Hyeonor, build a house on her family's land in Tam Kia. I wasn't naive in that particular direction. What I was doing was thinking in 6-month increments, which is, I think, something men in uncertain good situations do. You don't name the thing too confidently. You don't plan too far forward. You just keep the current 6 months going, and then you'll see about the next 6 months. It's a way of having something without risking the full cost of admitting you have it. The problem with that approach is that it leaves you with no framework for deciding when enough is enough. When does the helping stop? At what amount? At what number of requests? I had no answer to those questions because I'd never asked them. I was improvising, month by month, and the improvisation was costing me money I didn't have. We were in a market near C1 Market in early November, a covered place off Haiphong Street, stalls selling vegetables and dried goods, and live fish in plastic tubs. And we were walking through it together looking for something she needed, I can't remember what. And a group of 4 or 5 older women near one of the stalls noticed us. I'm not imagining this. I've become quite good at noticing what I'm not supposed to notice. They watched us pass, and one of them said something, and the others laughed. Not cruelly. The way you laugh at something you've seen before. The way you laugh at something familiar. I asked Lynn what they said. She kept walking. She said, "Oh, nothing, just that you were tall." I nodded. I let it go. I wanted to let it go. That's the precise and accurate statement. I asked Tommy about it that week, obliquely. I said, in general, how do Vietnamese people here tend to perceive, and I chose the word carefully, perceive a foreign man with a younger local woman? Just in general. What's the typical view? He was quiet for a moment. We were sitting in his kitchen, his wife was out, he'd made tea. He said, it depends. He said, in some cases, people see it as a genuine relationship, particularly if the man speaks some Vietnamese, has been around for a while, is known in the community. He said in other cases, and he was choosing his words here, I could see it. In other cases, people have a framework for it that's based on what they've seen most commonly. And what they've seen most commonly is a financial arrangement. He said, I'm not saying that's your situation, Patty. I'm just answering the question. I said, right. I said, is there something you want to talk about? I said, no, I'm grand. He nodded. He let it go, too. Late November. A Tuesday night, Lynn had gone back to Hainan that afternoon, and I was in the guest house room with Derek on the wall and the fan clicking and a 333 I'd bought from the place downstairs. I opened my phone's notes app and I typed in the numbers. Not because I'd been avoiding it, I told myself. Just because I hadn't gotten around to it. The GP visit, specialist. 3 months of medication. The rent shortfall from August and September. The hospital for loan. The water pump. The school fees. The phone bills. The meals and taxi fares from the early months, which I'd barely registered at the time. The motorbike, which was mine, but was partly for her if I was honest. I added them up. I sat with the number for a while. Then I closed the app without saving. The number scared me. But the closing of the app was the part that scared me properly, because it told me something about myself I didn't want to know. I wasn't closing it because the number was wrong. I was closing it because the number was wrong. I was closing it because I didn't want it in writing. December arrived. The weather changed slightly, cooler in the evenings, and filled up again with tourists, and Lynn's hours at the shop increased, and I told myself things were stabilizing. I texted Ciaran back about Christmas. He'd sent a brief message, cheerful, asking how I was getting on, and I stared at it for 20 minutes before typing something equally brief and cheerful back. Fine, great weather, keeping busy. No mention of Lynn, obviously. No mention of the money, obviously. No mention of the market, and the women laughing at something they'd seen before. When I went down to Hainan that December, Lynn went to bed early most evenings. She was working long shifts again in the busy season, and she was genuinely exhausted. And so I'd sit in the main room of the flat with a cup of tea, and Lone would be on her phone in the corner, and Wong would be there, quiet as always, drinking her tea. Getting closer, somehow. As if she was measuring a distance, checking whether it had got small enough yet. I didn't know what she was waiting to say. I just knew she was waiting to say something. It was a Wednesday evening in the second week of December. Lynn had worked a double shift and gone to bed at 9, and Lone had gone out somewhere, a friend's birthday, I think, and so it was just hung in me at the small kitchen table with 2 cups of Trier, the iced green tea she always made in a large jar and kept in the fridge. The flat smelled of incense from the altar in the corner, and something frying from a neighbor's kitchen. Outside, a motorbike idled in the hum and then moved away. Hyang sat down across from me and then moved away. Hyang sat down across from me and put both hands around her glass and looked at me. She said, I want to tell you something. My English is not always good enough. Please be patient with me, I said, of course. She said it carefully, in pieces, sometimes stopping to find a word or rephrase something that hadn't come out right. She'd prepared this. You could hear it, not in a scripted way, but in the way of someone who has rehearsed the difficult parts and knows where the hard sections are coming. She was nervous. Her hand stayed on the glass the whole time. She told me what people in the neighborhood said about me and Lynn, not strangers, people who knew them. The women in the building, the man who ran the small grocery 2 doors down, the woman at the corner who sold banh mi in the mornings and had watched Lynn come and go for 3 years. She said there was a phrase they used, Shudabi uz shock, a transactional pairing, not an insult exactly. Just a category, a thing they had seen enough times to have a name for. She said she wanted me to understand what this meant, and what it did not mean. It did not mean Lynn was a bad person. It did not mean she felt nothing. Xu was careful about this, and I believe she meant it. She said, I think Lynn does care for you, in her way. But caring for you and what is happening, these are not the same thing, and they are also not separate things. Do you understand? I said I thought so. She said, her family in Tam Kai, they believe you are a wealthy Western man, not enormously wealthy, but wealthy in the way that all Thai Westerners are wealthy, in the way they understand it. They believe you can absorb the expenses without noticing. The water pump, the school fees, her father's doctors. These things were asked because the family believed this about you. And Lynn did not correct this belief. She said that last part quietly and without accusation, which was somehow the most difficult part of the whole conversation. I said, she doesn't know what I actually have. Hing said, no, and her parents know even less. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the home had gone quiet. The incense on the family altar had burned down, and the last of it drifted sideways in the small draft from the window. I said, why are you telling me this? She looked at her glass. She said, I have a father too. He is in Quang Nam. He is 63. He worked his whole life on the land. I would not want someone to do to him what is being done to you. She paused. She said, even if the person doing it did not fully understand that they were doing it. She said one more thing before she stopped. She said it without looking up. She said, she's not making a life with you. She is making a bridge. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would have been useful. I knew, somewhere below the surface, that this was true. I'd known it in the way you know something that lives below where you're willing to look. Hal had just brought it up into the light and put it on the table between us, and now it was there, and we both had to sit with it. I thanked her. I meant it. She nodded and picked up the glasses and took them to the sink, and that was the end of the conversation. Lynn was asleep. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment. She was on her side, one arm under the pillow, the ceiling fan turning slowly above her. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what language to say it in, literally or otherwise. I went back down to the Honda Wave, and I drove back to Da Nang on the coast road in the dark. The following week, I replied to her messages a little slower than usual. The week after that, slower again. I missed a Wednesday. I said I had a job on, which was true. I said I might not make it down that Saturday. We'd see, which was not something I'd ever said before. She messaged asking if I was okay. I said, yes, fine, just busy. She sent a short voice note, just a few seconds, saying she missed me. I listened to it twice and didn't reply until the next morning. I want to be clear about what I was doing and what I wasn't doing. I wasn't strategizing. I wasn't executing a plan. I was simply the only thing I was capable of at the time, which was reducing, degree by degree, because I couldn't confront and couldn't leave cleanly and had no script for either. You confront someone and they cry or they get angry or they say something that makes you feel like the worst person alive, and you're back to where you started, except with the additional wound of having caused a scene. One didn't have the nerve for it, so I reduced. I stretched the gaps. I let it thin out. By mid-January, she stopped calling. The last message she sent was a Zalo text, brief, saying she hoped I was well. I read it on a Tuesday morning in the guesthouse room, with Derek on the wall, and the fan clicking, and the smell of banshao coming up from the sem below as it always did. I read it twice. I put the phone down. I made tea. The silence had the quality of a pipe finally giving out after a long time, under pressure. Not a surprise. Not even a shock. Just the thing you've been listening for. Finally audible. Finally here. I told Tommy the full version 3 days later. We were sitting in his kitchen again. The same spot where I'd asked him that oblique question about perceptions in November. I told him about Sheng and the conversation in the 3 weeks of slow withdrawal and the last message. I told him all of it. He listened without interrupting, which is not his natural mode. Tommy is a man who talks, normally, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I'm sorry, Patty. That's all he said. I'm sorry. He did not say, I told you so. He did not say, I told you so. He did not say, I tried to warn you, twice. He did not say, you should have listened when I said something. He had earned every one of those sentences, and he chose not to use any of them. I've thought about that choice a lot since. It was a significant act of friendship, and I don't think I've properly acknowledged it to him. I went home that evening, home being the guest house, the room, the fan. Derek and I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, in the dark. Not crying, not angry, just very still, the way you are when the verdict has finally come down on something that ended weeks ago. The trial was over. I was just sitting with the paperwork. Outside, the hem was alive with the hum, was alive with the hum, was alive with the hum was, quote, a woman calling to someone upstairs, a motorbike squeezing through the narrow gap between the walls. Somewhere a few streets over, someone was doing karaoke badly and with great conviction. Vietnam going about its business, entirely indifferent to Paddy Noonan and his 9 months of careful knot. I was still in Da Nang. I was still in the guest house. Still in the guest house. Those facts remained. I'd start working out what they added up to in the morning. Right. So, the accounting. I do this the way I'd assess a job that's gone wrong. You don't start by looking for someone to blame. You start by looking at the actual damage, because you can't fix anything until you know what's broken. So here it is, as plainly as I can say it. Between the motorbike and the last medication payment and everything in between, I spent somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 euro on Lynn and her family over 9 months. I've been through it twice now, properly, the way I should have done in November instead of closing the app. And it lands somewhere in that range depending on how I count the motorbike. On my income, which is roughly 14,000 euro a year before living costs, that's 4 months of living. I still owe Tommy 1,000 euro. I haven't forgotten about it. I'll get it back to him. I want to be clear that I'm not telling you this number as a headline figure to make it sound dramatic. It's not dramatic. Some of the stories on channels like this one involve men losing their life savings, their houses, their pensions. I didn't lose any of those things because I didn't have any of those things. What I lost was the margin. The thin, precarious margin between getting by and not getting by, which for a man in my situation is the most important number there is. That's the financial accounting. The other accounting is harder. You came here with a question. The title of this episode: How do locals really feel about a 60-year-old with a young Vietnamese woman? And I've been carrying that question for 9 months now, turning it over, trying to answer it fairly. Here's what I know. When Vietnamese people looked at me and Lynn together, at the market, at the restaurant, at the Kem Tum place in Sintra, they weren't seeing what I was seeing. I was seeing a man who'd found something unexpected and good in a part of his life he'd more or less written off. They were seeing a Thai, a Westerner, a foreigner, with a young local woman, and in their experience, in the experience of everyone around them who had seen this same picture many times before, that picture has a name. Not always, not universally, but most commonly, a financial arrangement with emotional packaging. That's the category. That's what they were looking at. They weren't wrong. I want to say that plainly. They weren't wrong in the way I want to say they were wrong, which is that they were making assumptions about something specific and unique and real. They were reading a pattern correctly. They just couldn't know that I didn't know what pattern I was in. There's a word I want to use here. The Vietnamese concept of thu dien, face, social reputation, the way you are perceived in your community. In Vietnamese culture, this matters enormously. And part of what Hu Diong was telling me, though she didn't use this word, was that Lynn's family in Tom Kai had a certain face to consider. A daughter in Hu Diong with a wealthy Western man. That's a particular kind of face, a useful kind, and the requests that came through, the pump, the school fees, the doctors, arrived partly because of how that picture looked from that distance. A tame man who could absorb such things without noticing. Of course the requests came. Of course they did. I'm not angry about it. I want to be clear about this because I think people expect bitterness from a story like mine, and I don't have it to give. The family had needs. Genuine needs. Genuine needs. The logic they were operating on, foreigner plus young woman equals money, was a logic built from experience, not malice. Poverty makes you practical. I grew up with people who were practical in exactly that way, and I understood it even when it was aimed at me. What I am is wiser, for whatever that's worth at 59. I'll tell you the thing I think about most. Of all the people in this story, me, Lynn, Tommy, Balan with her look over the tea glass, the women at the market who laughed. The most honest person was a 31-year-old woman named Hung, who worked in a fabric wholesale place and made iced green tea in a jar and sat down across from me one December evening and said something that cost her something to say. She owed me nothing. She'd known me for 4 months. She told me anyway because she has a father, and she didn't want someone to do to him what was being done to me, even if the person doing it didn't fully understand that they were doing it. I think about that sentence a lot. Even if the person doing it didn't fully understand that they were doing it. That's the most complicated sentence in this whole story. I don't know exactly what Lynn understood and didn't understand. I don't know where her genuine feeling for me ended and the bridge began. I suspect those two things were more tangled together than either of us could see clearly. I've made my peace with not knowing. There is one more thing. In February, I sent Neve a voice note. Not about any of this. She doesn't know about Vietnam or Lynn or any of it, and I don't think that's information she needs. I just said, "Hey, hope you're well, been thinking about you, nothing urgent, 40 seconds. Then I put the phone down and didn't stare at it. She replied. 2 sentences. She said she was good, and she was glad to hear my voice. I want to be careful not to make too much of 2 sentences, but I'll tell you this, those 2 sentences did more for me than the whole year of good weather. More than the motorbike on the coast road with the sea on my right. More than anything, 2 sentences from my youngest daughter saying she was glad to hear my voice. Some things you can't afford to lose. Some things you didn't know you still had. I don't regret coming to Vietnam. I don't regret Lynn, even now. What I regret is not knowing what I was inside before I walked into it. Not knowing about the Tay premium, the automatic, invisible assumption of wealth that follows a Western man in this country, whether he wants it or not. Not knowing that when a Vietnamese community looks at an age gap relationship between a foreigner and a local woman, they are reading from a text they have read many times before, and their reading is generally accurate, and you can think you're the exception all you want, and you are still inside the same story. If you walk into a card game not knowing it's a card game, that's not the table's fault. That's what I'd tell you. Know what game is being played before you sit down. I'm still in Da Nang, still in the guest house, still fixing pipes. Derek is still on the wall above the door. The fan still clicks. Some things are exactly as they were, and I've stopped expecting that to feel like failure. That's it. That's the whole of it. And that's Patty Noonan, still in Da Nang, still in the same room he arrived in, still, as far as we know, on good terms with his gecko. I want to take a moment to sit with what you've just heard because it deserves that. This story doesn't have a villain. That's what makes it unusual. Lynn wasn't running a script. She wasn't have a villain. One wasn't running a script. She was a 24-year-old woman from a poor farming family who found herself in a relationship with a foreign man and did not correct her family's assumption about what that meant. That is a moral failure of a particular kind, quiet, self-interested, understandable in context, real in consequence. But it isn't villainy. It's something smaller and more human and much harder to protect yourself against. Let me answer the title question directly, because it deserves a direct answer. How do locals really feel about a 60-year-old with a young Vietnamese woman? Most of them feel certain. Quietly, privately certain. They have seen this before. They have a name for it. And in Patty's case, they were right, even though Patty was also right about some of it. Both things were true simultaneously. That gap between what the community could see clearly from the outside and what Patty could not see from the inside, that gap is what this channel is about. It's the gap that costs men everything from a few months living, like Patty, to their entire retirement fund, which we've covered here before and will cover again. 3 things to take from this story if you're thinking about Vietnam or already here. The Thai premium is real, and it operates on you whether you're aware of it or not. Awareness doesn't make it disappear. But going in knowing that you are perceived as wealthy, regardless of your actual situation. That knowledge changes what questions you ask and when you ask them. Vietnamese family obligation is genuine. It is not always manipulation. In Patty's story, the requests were real. The needs were real. The poverty was real. But genuine need can still empty your account just as thoroughly as a calculated scheme. And the kindness you feel in responding to it can blind you to the pace at which it's happening. and the expat community will often see what you can't. Tommy tried twice. He was careful both times, kind both times, and Patty chose not to hear him both times. The cost of that choice was real. If someone you trust who knows this country raises the same concern twice, that's not them being cynical. That's them trying to give you something you can't give yourself. Patty reviewed this story before we published it. He approved everything you've heard. He asked us to mention one thing in the closing. Derek the Gecko is still there. The room's the same. Some things are grand. If this story resonated with you, or if you recognize yourself in any part of it, the comments are open. There are a lot of Patties out there, men at various stages of this kind of entanglement, some still in it, some already through the other side. This channel exists for all of them. Thank you for watching Inside Vietnam. We'll see you in the next one.